This experience occurred not too long ago, still fresh in my mind. But before I tell the story, I would like to give a little background about myself. I have been fascinated with the paranormal ever since my first experience in my old apartment at a very young age. Throughout the years of being somewhat sensitive to them, I have encountered shadow people, full-bodied apparitions, translucent figures, creepy grudge-like things, etc. throughout my whole life. I'm not a fully devoted Buddhist, but I do follow their teachings to an extent. Also, I no longer live in Thailand, but am back in the States. My family are no skeptics to the paranormal either. Each and every one of them have their own tales and encounters, but mostly kept it to themselves. They will share when asked, but if no inquiries are made, they will go on about their life. Their experiences I would write at another time while I try to accurately write their stories in a clear, chronological manner. Since you know a little bit more about me now, I will give a short background about why I was in Thailand. In April 2012, I applied to various teaching positions at private schools. My current job did not pay much, and I wanted to use the teaching experience to add to my resume for future professional goals. The search for a job did not take long, and I landed one at a well-established school which I enjoyed greatly while there. After my confirmation for the job and the green light during the hiring phase, I bought my flight tickets and began my journey to the land of smiles in April. I arrived and was picked up by the person who interviewed me via Skype and made our way to the capital of the province, a 40-minute drive through the countryside. I was excited, curious, and tired during the drive. Once I got to my house, I was in awe. It was completely different from what I was accustomed to back in the States, but I adapted rather quickly. As I unpacked into my room, I met my roommates, two middle-aged women from South Africa. Let's call them Sherry and Felicia. Sherry was the older of the two. They greeted me and went about their day, as they had already planned on doing so. At this moment, it gave me the opportunity to get a feel of the house. The house was 3 stories and contained 2 bathrooms and 3 bedrooms. One of the bathrooms is situated on the first floor and the other is next to my room. My bedroom was directly across from Sherry's and Felicia was alone on the 3rd floor. The stairway had very little lighting and was always emitting a dark, uneasy feeling. It could be because of the lighting in that area was horribly dim, setting its own mood. Either way, it was never a pleasant experience to go up and down the stairs. The way my room was laid out was rather awkward. Upon standing in the doorway into the room, there is another straight door ahead that exits to the balcony that looks over a parking lot of a nearby restaurant. Directly to the right of the door is a small desk and dresser, and across from the dresser is my bed, and in the path of the room door to the balcony door is a makeup mirror stand that faced directly straight to my bed, thus being able to see myself when I sat up. It would take about 2 weeks before I had my first experience. I can recall that morning getting ready for our teacher orientation and training. The only shoes I left out were my running shoes and the ones I wore around the city. In my luggage, I left my water shoes in there due to not having the time to use them. As I finished the day's monotonous agenda, I went home, and to my surprise, I saw my water shoes out next to my other shoes. At first, I responded with a, huh. I wondered if someone had came in and took my shoes out as a prank. Since my roommates and I were all out of the house and no one else had access to it, I just assumed it must have been me who did it, but I brushed it off anyways. The following nights I had terrible experiences of trying to sleep. It was a mix of the firmness of my bed and dogs barking late at night and being away from family back in the States. To my surprise, when I spoke to my roommates about these problems with sleep, they all felt the same. During that time, we believed it was due to the assimilation into a foreign environment, which was true for the most part. In the daytime, the room was bearable. It made me feel safe, but as evening approached, the atmosphere in my room and the house shifted into a more ominous one. At this time of the day, I no longer felt alone wherever I walked in the house. There was this constant feeling of being watched and followed by a male presence. I believed it to be male at the time because it was a very heavy feeling and nothing that I would associate with a female's. I kept this to myself for about a week before I asked Sherry about it. She too admitted that the house felt rather strange at night but chose to ignore it. Felicia felt the same way too, but gave her own theories about why we were feeling the way we did. She believed it had to do with our inner stress and whatnot. I responded it was possible, but my experiences up to that point made me think otherwise. The next 2 weeks were hellish to my mind and body. I would go to sleep around 12 a.m. and constantly wake up every hour for 3 hours, finally sleeping around 4 a.m. It was very annoying because I had to get up early for work. I was becoming very irritated with everything around me and tried my best to keep a calm composure. Then one day, I brought up the idea of doing a food offering to the spirit of the house because we had a Chinese altar on the first floor. My roommates and I affirmed. The ritual was pretty simple in nature and required some food or snacks to be offered, a cup of water, and incense to symbolize the transformation of the food from physical form to spiritual. The offering consisted of 2 store-bought sandwich snacks and water in a glass cup. During the ritual, Sherry and Felicia sat behind me while I led the ritual of asking the spirit to welcome and protect us and that we do not mean to disturb it. I don't know if I did the ritual correctly. I just thought the idea of a food offering would appease the spirit of the house because I had seen my parents do it before. I lit 3 Asian incenses, put them in between my palms, and spoke in my head and out loud, bowing 3 times in between. After the last bow, I stuck the incenses into a cup filled with rice, allowing it to stand upright. Once the short ritual was completed, we all felt the atmosphere change. It felt lighter. Even the dark areas of the house felt lighter, as if the house finally allowed us to stay and call it home. Nothing out of the ordinary occurred during this grace period until Felicia decided to move for personal reasons. It had nothing to do with the house. We bid her farewell and she left about 3 weeks after the ritual. Looking back at this moment, Sherry and I made a key mistake of not doing another ritual to allow Felicia to leave because after she had left, it all started again, but the feelings were stronger than the previous and sightings began to occur. The day Felicia left was pretty quiet. The reason being is that Sherry and I worked in the day. Sherry worked from 7:30 to 4:30 p.m. respectively, and I worked from 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. Regardless of my start time, I got up early anyways because I hated rushing to work. We knew of the day she left, but when she physically left the house, we were already at work. We went about our business as usual and chit-chat like we always did when I got off of work. Sherry was a mother figure to me because she was about the age of my mom, and I enjoyed talking to her about the day when I was off of work. I came to be known, jokingly, by the other teachers as her son because she had a son about my age as well. We were pretty close and shared a lot of experiences and thoughts with one another. It did not take too long for her to bring up weird happenings during our daily conversations. One day, after arriving home around 7:30 p.m., I entered the house feeling weird again. It was heavy and uneasy. I asked her how her day was, and she said it was fine for the most part, except for chitter-chatter that she would hear outside her door near the stairs. She said it sounded like 2 people talking, but she could not understand what they were saying. Even if it were Thai, she would at least be able to remember some of the words, and I can have it translated by some of the Thai staff we worked with. But it was nothing coherent. She said she did not feel scared, just curious to what it could be. At this point, we did not ever cross the idea of the incidents being connected to Felicia's departure. But onward with the story, this incident and other incidents to come would gradually lead to an ever-active manifestation of the male spirit. That would not occur until about a week later, but before his manifestation, he would be felt roaming around the house. For instance, I would come downstairs to the kitchen, and while making some coffee, I would see him in my peripheral, moving out of frame as if it were intentional. I do not really know if this is the case, but to Sherry and I, it seemed so. To add to this, Sherry would tell me that while she is downstairs in the kitchen making noodles, she would see the man manifest as a translucent shape, walk from the base of the stairs and vanish once it got to the first landing. She did not tell me this until I told her about what I saw, which was almost identical to her experience. Then onward, I would talk to nothing or something about not bothering me and that I was aware of its existence. I felt somewhat crazy at this point, but it made me feel sane. Throughout this point of my time in Thailand, I did not speak about it to the other teachers, but occasionally would put it out there, never following up on it. Not until I was talking to a colleague of mine. He has been teaching for the school for over a year already and knew many of the previous teachers from his first year teaching. When I brought up my strange occurrences from the first part of my story, the one about the shoes moving, he told me that the person who had lived and slept in the very same room had experienced the same thing. I was shocked to hear that, but felt at ease because I knew that it was not me who took the shoes out. So I was able to confirm one part of my experience, which was a relief, but some may wonder about the male presence. This history will be in the final part of the story. Onward with the story, Sherry and I were the only ones in the house for about 3 weeks before we had new roommates move in. They were a couple I will call Jane and Ricky. Ricky taught while Jane stayed home. While we gained new roommates, I would later have confirmation from Sherry that she would leave for family reasons, which was devastating news to me because I have grown to enjoy her company for the short time that I have lived with her. The new roommates I would not officially meet until about a week after their stay due to coming home tired. I would talk to Sherry and head straight to bed. But on one occasion, I pulled up to our house gate with my motor scooter. My engine was still on and the lights peering into the dark living room of ours. Straight ahead is the doorway into the kitchen area, and directly to its left are the stairways. While looking ahead and opening the gates, I see a male figure that I thought was Ricky. The reason being is that I, still at this point, have not met him in person, so I just assumed it was him. The figure was about 5 feet 11 inches tall, or approximately 180 centimeters. It wore a white t-shirt and blue jeans and stood there emotionless. As I parked and approached the door, the figure turned towards the stairs and turned off the kitchen light. I rushed it off and assumed that he probably did not want to see me or something, so I entered the house more curious about the situation and walked into Sherry's room. I told her about what happened, and she said it was an awkward thing to do, and we set the incident aside and talked about our day instead. That very same weekend, Sherry was leaving back to South Africa. So during her last night in the house, I helped her pack and talked about how it was going to suck not having someone to talk to after work. She agreed and said she will not miss the conversations we had daily. That night, I awoke out of my sleep feeling uneasy and turned on the lights right away. I had the feeling of being watched from my door. I laid in bed listening to music and eventually fell back asleep. Later that morning, I woke up around 5:30 a.m. to help Sherry bring down her luggage. Once we cleared out her room, we proceeded downstairs. We sat on our table outside and talked for the very last time when our pickup service arrived. We exchanged goodbyes, hugged, and I went back inside and fell asleep. During the slumber, I had a dream about Sherry and how she was taken away from me. I woke up feeling sad and actually shed a few tears. I showered and continued on with my Sherry-less day and eventually met Jane while walking downstairs to make some coffee. We talked for a bit and I brought up if anything weird has happened to her ever since moving in, and to my surprise, she had a few experiences that she could not explain. So I invited her to sit outside at the table and we talked all afternoon. Ricky was at work and his work days were different from most teachers. His week started on Wednesdays and ended on Sunday. Jane proceeded to tell me an experience. At this point, I had not shared anything with her. She told me about the kitchen. She said she was making coffee and saw a man walk upstairs. I was extremely shocked at this point and had goosebumps because 3 people had seen the exact same thing, leading me to believe that it must be some type of residual haunting. She also began to share the feeling of being watched and would sometimes wake up abruptly from her sleep, on guard as if something sinister had made itself known. While this occurred to her, Ricky had no experiences and remained a skeptic for the most part until his own encounters, which I will share later. Since I was already talking about weird things, I brought up about Ricky and spoke about the day I saw him standing at the doorway to the kitchen. And to her surprise, she said he was not that type of person and it could not have been him. I was creeped out because I thought I was looking at flesh and blood. Also, the reason why it could have not been Ricky was that he did not own any white t-shirts or jeans, just shorts and colored t-shirts and trousers. During this day, we spent it all conversing about experiences we had back home, and Ricky chimed in too as a skeptic. We all went to bed late at night feeling tired and scared. Over the following week, strange occurrences would happen to Jane and finally Ricky. On the other hand, I only felt the heavy presence of the spirit that stared at me. Unfortunately, the author did not write the second part of this story, so we won't know what happened, but let's just assume that they're still alive and well. The story I'm about to share is the story of my friend named B. She and her two brothers were on their way home, and it would take 3 hours to get there. Mark was seated on the driver's seat, followed by his sister B and their older brother Chie. He was driving fast because they had to be home before their mom's birthday. Halfway through their journey, Mark saw a woman crossing the road, wearing black and carrying something. He didn't say a word, but B asked her brothers if they saw it. All of them did. While they were talking about what they saw, Mark looked at the driver's mirror and saw the woman running after the car. They were very frightened, and Mark drove the car as fast as he could. But the woman in black also ran as fast as she could until she reached the side window of the drivers and looked at them and disappeared. They were very frightened but reached home safely. Nobody dared to sleep in their own bedrooms that night. Instead, the 3 of them slept in their parents'. The same woman appeared in Mark's dream. He said that the woman in black stood next to him and apologized. She said, "I didn't mean to scare you, but please say a prayer for me. I am not at peace. Please do merit for me in the temple." She also explained how she died. She said, "My husband and I were riding a motorcycle around 1 a.m. from a party in town. My husband stopped to use the bathroom and he parked the motorcycle along the road when suddenly a car ran over me and the motorcycle and left me. My husband couldn't take me to the hospital. I died because of too much bleeding. I will find the man who hit me." Then she disappeared and Mark woke up from his dream. The next day, Mark and his family went to the temple and did merit and prayers for that woman. Ever since then, she never came back to visit him in his dreams. I know that this is not a very scary story, but I think it's very good. It's a true story. I hope that he forgives me for sharing my story with you all. I think he understands. Ever since my beloved grandfather passed away, I couldn't get a hold of myself for weeks. He was the one who loved me the most and cared for me because I was his favorite grandchild. I miss him so much, and I almost got over him until it happened to me. My grandfather died on my grandmother's anniversary of her death, so you can say that he had waited until that day and then died peacefully. My mother said that it was a miracle that my grandfather had passed away on the same day as my grandmother, and that they must have loved each other so much that on the day he died, my grandmother was there to take him away. Just thinking about this makes me want to cry. I know this is a long time, but it's true. 5 months had passed and I have almost forgotten about my grandparents. Just almost. It was a late night and I couldn't sleep, so I stayed up later than I should have, chatting on the internet. Just when I turned off the light, I saw a shadow. I immediately looked behind me and there was nobody. I thought that it was just probably my imagination, so I eventually turned out the light again. I lay there in my bed thinking what I should wear tomorrow for school now that I have a boyfriend. I was about to fall asleep when I heard somebody calling my name. I sat up from my bed and I looked around. Seeing that there was nobody, I went back to bed and tried to fall asleep. Again, I heard somebody call my name. This time I looked at the bedroom door. I went to open the door, wondering who was calling me from outside. Nobody. I closed the door and there it was, sitting on the chair. I was so afraid to look at it that I ran to my bed and covered myself under the blankets. Then, when it sounded like nobody was there, I peeked from under the blankets. Nobody. Empty. Suddenly, I felt a gust of wind blow past me that messed up my table filled with papers. I was so frightened that I hid under the covers and fell asleep. The next day, I woke up and I had to clean and reorganize my papers that were on my table. Then, I noticed that my grandfather's picture was on the chair. When I thought about it, my grandfather always sat on that chair whenever he sat down to tell me stories. Right there and then, I noticed that it must have been my grandfather. It's like he wants me to remember that he's always with me. So now, still, I know that miracles can happen, although it did scare me to death when I saw that figure sitting there staring at me. That black shadow was my grandfather. This is my first story shared of my experiences and definitely not my last. I can start off first that my mother is from Thailand and my father is from Harlem, New York City. My mom has always told me about her beliefs in the spirit world. My dad, on the other hand, always told me that spirits can't hurt you physically. I moved to Thailand with my family in 1994. We were transferred there for 6 years, and since my mother was from there, my dad figured it would be nice to know that side of the family. During this time, I was in 4th grade, in a new country, and trying to adjust to our new home. My room was enormous and I had my own bathroom. My room was at the end of the hall, and my younger brother's room was in the middle of the hall, and my parents were on the other end. I believe this was a month after we had moved in. One day I was taking a bath. When I had finished, I set my foot out onto the carpet and boom, something pushed me out the tub and I fell and caught myself on the counter. Now mind you, I had carpet on the floor, so I know I didn't slip out of that tub. It felt like some type of force pushed me out. I ran to my parents' room and told my mom what happened. That same night, she called my grandmother, and my grandmother said that we should have the house blessed. So, that very weekend, it was a lot of monks that came, if I can remember. It was around 8 or more. They came to bless the house. We had to pray, and I was told to wear these 3 black and gold Buddha bracelets for 3 months. I still have them to this day. Afterwards, everything seemed fine, but little things every now and then would happen. For instance, we had a housekeeper, and she had her room beside the kitchen, but she always ended up in my room sleeping on the floor. She would tell my mom that she would hear knockings on her walls, movement in her room when she was the only one in there. Now, from what I was told, Thailand has numerous names: Land of the Smiles, the Land of the Dead, or the Land of the Spirits. Everyone in my building had a housekeeper, so what they did was they would get together and talk about different occurrences in my building and the other buildings that were housed with American families. Each building had what's called a spirit house, and my mom would go downstairs every weekend to pay her respects. Another incident happened when my dad was out of the country, so my brother and I would sleep in my mom's room with her. My mom was on her side, and my brother was in the middle, and I was on my dad's side. I was awakened by some sort of talking going on in the middle of the night. When I opened my eyes to look, there, sitting at the foot of the bed on my side, were 2 little boys. They were ghostly figures. I wasn't too scared because I had seen that they were little boys, but just in a white translucent appearance. They were sitting at the foot of my bed, laughing and pointing at me, saying, "You're a bad girl," giggling and then continuing to point at me. I shut my eyes hard and covered my ears so I couldn't hear them. I told my mom the next day and she laughed at me, not because she didn't believe me, but she said that those little boys were right. I was being a bad girl during the time, and I was. My last incident I will share happened in another building. I was with my younger brother, who was 7 years old at the time, and I was 9. We were walking with our new housekeeper. This was because the first one left because she was too scared to live with us. All 3 of us were going to the top floor where the pool was at. My brother and I were walking by the pool. During this time, nobody was using it, so it was pretty dry around the pool. I turned around and all of a sudden, my housekeeper was screaming for me. I ran up and I saw her trying to pull up my brother out of the pool. He was a small skinny boy and she was struggling to pull him out, so I grabbed his other arm and it took us 5 minutes to finally pull him out of that pool. He said that something suddenly pulled him in. He held onto the drain and was yelling for us. Our housekeeper was explaining to my mother that something was still pulling him into that water. I vouched for her because it took us 5 minutes to yank him out. He was such a small boy, and for 2 people to pull him out, it was unbelievable. A couple of weeks went by and my mom came home. She pulled me aside and explained to me what was pulling my brother down. She had talked to a couple of the people in the building where we were at, and apparently a young boy drowned there 3 years ago. No one ever swims in that pool by themselves because it is said that the boy tries to pull you down with him. On that day, it really caught us off guard. Even my brother tells us what happened every now and then. I am now 23 and he is 20, but he said he would never forget that day and how he almost lost his life because the boy's spirit was pulling him down. To this day, I will never forget all the things that we experienced back in Thailand. These are some weird and freaky occurrences. I'm very glad that I'm now back in the States. This true encounter happened to me while I was living in Bangkok, Thailand. I was in 5th grade at the time. I had a sleepover with 2 of my friends, Mary and Tasha. Now mind you, I was always into hearing ghost stories and whatnot, but I never did those Ouija boards or seances or anything. Now, my friend Mary was heavy into the paranormal. Her house is haunted, and with that, strange things always happened in her household, and this was a regular thing to her. Now, Tasha was one of my other friends. She was the total opposite of Mary. She just liked to stay up late talking about school and didn't like to talk of the paranormal. It was around 2 a.m. and we all became bored. Mary suggested that we play a hypnosis game. So here we are, all 3 of us sitting on my bed looking at each other. I told them I didn't want to really take part in it, but just wanted to watch. So Tasha said that she'll be the one that was put to sleep while Mary was at the couch. Tasha lay straight on my bed while Mary sat Indian style with Tasha's head lying on her legs with a pillow underneath it. Mary then takes her fingers and places them on Tasha's temples and starts telling her that she is getting very sleepy. At first, Tasha bursted out laughing, and so did I because Mary was getting serious and we just weren't buying it. After 20 minutes of laughing, Tasha started feeling pretty sleepy. Mary started counting from 50, and by the time she got to 0, Tasha's eyes were closed and she was very drowsy. We were talking to her as she was falling asleep. We asked her about what she saw, and she said she saw green grass, extremely tall like she was on a farm. But then she said that there was a storm coming. Now mind you, Tasha's eyes are closed, but they are moving as if she is either really dreaming or actually there. We then asked her what was wrong because we could see her eyes moving rapidly. She said she saw dark clouds coming her way like it was going to storm. Then she started to shake. Mary asked her what was wrong and what did she see. Tasha said that somebody was chasing her, and every time she turns back, whatever it was gets closer. At this point, I was dead quiet, just looking, and Mary tells her not to look back and to run to a church. She told her that there has to be a church nearby and that there was a priest waiting for her. Tasha's eyes were still closed, and she said that she saw the church and was running as fast as she could. But by the time she said that she got to the church, the priest had already closed his doors. By this time, she started crying and kept saying, "Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God." Mary and I were looking at each other, and we both said, "What's wrong? What do you see?" Tasha then said that the priest's eyes were turning red and blood was coming out. I didn't like how this was turning because I knew for a fact that Tasha was not faking the whole thing. I knew this because I started tickling her feet, and she's extremely ticklish, so I could see if she was just lying to us. But she had no reaction and she was still trembling and crying. That's when I couldn't take it anymore, so I shook her and told her that it was a dream to get out of it. Everything was extremely still for 3 minutes. Tasha was laying there with her eyes closed, but this time it was just silence with no movement. Mary at this time was still sitting down with Tasha's head on her lap. She was calling her name. "Tasha? Tasha." Is everything okay?" Tasha then said, "Who's Tasha?" "This isn't Tasha," she said in a low, monotone voice. Mary and I looked at each other, and I started shaking my head to stop. But Mary said, "Who are you?" Tasha, or whoever it was, said, "Who do you want me to be? I am what you cannot see, unless you want to see me." By then, I couldn't take it anymore. I slapped Tasha in her face to wake her up. She sat straight up and started screaming at the top of her lungs. She ran out of my room and down the stairs and out of my apartment door. We had to run after her because by then it was a little after 2:30 a.m. and my parents were asleep and so was the whole building. She didn't want to go back into my house, but after we calmed her down, she came back into the apartment with us. I kept on asking her what happened and why did she run out like that. She said she felt as if something put a hand over her mouth so she couldn't say anything, but she could feel her mouth moving, but she wasn't the one doing the speaking. After all of this, we tried to calm down and then head to bed because we've had enough. A week went by and I went up to Tasha to ask her if she was okay, and she said yes, why wouldn't she be? So then I asked her if she remembered what happened that night, and she gave me a confused look and said that she doesn't remember anything. Tasha never spent the night at my house ever again. I'm still friends with Tasha and Mary to this day, but Mary and I still talk about the encounter, about what happened to Tasha. On the other hand, Tasha doesn't remember anything. I just want to let everyone know that if you have small kids, please don't let them watch any kind of scary movies that they can imitate, like, for instance, The Craft. Some young kids try to reenact those things and they sometimes get the surprise of their life. Back then I was so young and I felt like it was harmless, but I've had my days and I'm happy to say that that was back then. That was also the last time I've ever participated in a hypnosis, or any kind of thing that could deal with spirits. My partner and I have a house in the closed-in suburbs of Bangkok, recently built. The land was vacant. As far as we know, there were no other structures that were there previously. His family had owned the land for many years. We spent our time between living in the US and Thailand. I was at the house in December, and in January we were back from a long time overseas. One morning, as I laid in bed, I had the feeling that someone was sitting next to me, sitting on the headboard of the bed. It was a low, wide headboard, about 6 inches wide. I looked up, and there sat a 12-year-old Thai schoolboy with shortly cropped hair, a small build, and in his uniform. He had a white short-sleeved button-up shirt, a red handkerchief, blue shorts, and he was smiling and outstretching his hand, offering me a glass of water. Then he suddenly vanished. This was so unexpected that I sat up and screamed. My partner came running from downstairs to find out what was happening. It wasn't necessarily scary, but quite unsettling. The next morning, as I lay in bed, the same boy walked across my bed headboard from left to right, and he passed me, bent down, and playfully patted or tapped the top of my head. Then, that same evening, it was late at night and I was downstairs, changing the laundry when a voice very clearly called out, "Hello?" My partner was asleep in bed 2 stories above me, and the voice sounded like a boy or a woman. I tried to convince myself that I didn't hear it, but it was extremely clear, as though it was no more than a few feet away from me. Soon after, the boy appeared to me in a dream and told me that his name was Den or Tan or something like that. My partner's family lives in the house next door, and his brother confided that he too had some experiences meeting Den or Tan, but mostly disembodied voices. My partner's family had a boy die many years ago, but as a baby, not a 10 to 12-year-old boy. None of this was particularly frightening, but just very unsettling. His face is very clear to me. I can recall every detail of how he looked. Summing up all of this, to me it felt as though he was curious about me, not threatening. My uncle passed away in 2010 while he was on holiday in Thailand. It was horrible for the whole family. I was young when it happened, but I remember it so well. When my mother and my nana found out, they caught a plane to Thailand and went to deal with the paperwork. I wasn't really the same after that. All the stress I went through took its toll and I became depressed, but after a while, the pain seemed to ease. I knew my uncle was in a better place. The pain never really left, but I just found it easier to cope with. I don't know what happened, but it felt lighter and happier. When my mother and Nana arrived back in Perth, they organized the funeral and we decided to have his body cremated. My uncle's ashes were kept at my Nana's house where he used to live. After a couple of months, she started telling my mother that sometimes she heard weird noises and footsteps and doors opening and closing. My Nana didn't feel harmed by this. She felt as if there was somebody watching over her. In April, my family and I traveled over to Thailand to spread my uncle's ashes there. We believed that was what he would have wanted because Thailand was his favorite place in the whole entire world. After a couple of days there, our hotel door rang by itself at all hours of the day and night, and on a closer look, we found that there would be nobody there. Our televisions would turn on and change channels all by itself. At one point, we just thought it was just a bad connection. Just before we were about to spread his ashes on the beach close to where he passed away, we decided to have his ashes blessed by the Thai monks. Later that day, we went down to the beach and we went to spread my uncle's ashes. It was around 8 p.m. We walked out into the water together and poured the ashes in there. A close friend of the family was taking pictures on her iPhone. The next day, she was showing us the pictures that she had taken. They had a cloud of smoke or mist-like substance surrounding us. The lady taking the photos was Thai and she told us that it was his spirit going to heaven. After this occurrence, the doorbell no longer rang. Doors don't open and close and channels don't flip over. Is he finally at rest? Last week, my mother underwent surgery at Bangkok's famous Bumrungrad Hospital, after which the doctors recommended she stay in the hospital for a few days while recovering. She was moved into room 905 on the 9th floor of the old building. In my daily visits to her at the hospital, I always got an uneasy feeling being in the room and usually couldn't stay there too long. At first, I thought maybe it was because I don't generally like being in hospitals. But anyways, my mother abruptly decided that she wanted to come back home a day earlier than she was supposed to. At first, I didn't make much of it, but once she got home, she told me something strange. She said for the past few nights, she had seen a woman wearing a white gown and a headscarf standing at the corner of the room calling out to her. The first night she saw her, she thought that she might have been hallucinating from the medication, but then, when the same thing happened on the second night, she was pretty sure something was not right in that room. Our best guess is that somebody passed away in that room and had not moved on yet. We hoped and prayed that her soul can rest in peace. I would be interested to hear if anyone had a similar experience at the same hospital or at any other hospitals in Bangkok. Personally, I do believe in the afterlife and believe that people who are lost before their time sometimes do not pass over right away. In this case, I'm pretty sure both my mom and my dad, who had been staying with her, had witnessed this phenomenon, but managed to deal with it in a proper way. They both said a prayer in the room before they left and prayed that if there was in fact any spirits present in there, that it would be at peace and find its way to the afterlife. This happened while on vacation in Koh Phi Phi Island, Thailand. I do not know if it was just a dream or otherwise. In 2007, I went to visit this island for a week vacation on my own. I had been to the island before, and this is my first time staying at this particular hotel. I stayed on the 3rd floor of this hotel in a nice deluxe room with a balcony. One night I was asleep and was awoken by a loud bang on the door with someone screaming, "Tsunami! Tsunami!" I was still in shock, sitting on the bed when the voice stopped, and then I saw hands coming from the corner near the bathroom with someone saying in a distressed voice, "Help me, Help me, please." At that same time, I woke up in the same position that I was in the dream, sitting on the bed. I was in shock and almost in tears. The whole dream felt so real. I felt as though there were souls who needed help. The following day, I asked the receptionist of this hotel if there was damage during the tsunami and if the water would have reached the 3rd floor, and they said that it did. I decided to say prayers and have my lights on every night until the day after I left.